Hi, do you like New York City? Are you familiar with these old skyscrapers? Did you know that one of these buildings was world's tallest for only 1 month? Or that one of them was named after a US president? Okay, that was pretty easy. Which building held the record for the longest time? I'm sure you recognize the spire of Chrysler Building, probably the most beautiful skyscraper. But did you know that for the architect, William Van Allen, his biggest accomplishment was also his ticket to obscurity? Did you know that for some skyscrapers, at their inauguration, even the president would turn on the illumination by pressing a button at the White House? Did you know that there was a race, and a pretty tight one at that, about building the world's tallest building in the 1920s? So let's take a look at the tallest skyscraper of that time and see how they are not just beautiful buildings, but also a piece of American history. The first building is MetLife Tower, situated in Madison Square Park, very close to Flatiron Building. MetLife Tower, first on our list, was built in 1909, and it was world's tallest until 1913, when it lost to Woolworth Building, which we're gonna see next. Then we have the height in feet and meters, and the light bulb means it's lit by night. National Register of Historic Places is the official list of buildings, among others, that are worthy of preservation, and it's overseen by the National Park Service. National Historic Landmark means officially recognized by the US government as having outstanding historical significance. The building was modeled after the Campanile in Venice, Italy. The clock is even larger than the more famous Big Ben in London. For each building, we're also going to show the architecture style underneath the eagles that are displayed on the Chrysler Building, and next to it, the architect or architecture firm. Next building on the list is Woolworth Building, situated in Lower Manhattan, very close to City Hall Park. Tallest building in the world between 1913 and 1930, when it lost to 40 Wall Street. It was once called the Cathedral of Commerce. It was built by Frank Woolworth, who at some point owned more than 1,000 retail stores. At the inauguration, President Wilson pressed a button at the White House in order to turn on the 80,000 light bulbs on the building. President Wilson was in office between 1913 and 1921. Next, 30 Rock, situated next to Fifth Avenue in Midtown, right across St. Patrick's Cathedral. It's also called GE Building, or 30 Rockefeller Plaza, or RCA Building, or more recently, Comcast Building. It's the first building constructed with elevators grouped in the central core. It's also the tallest building in the Rockefeller Center. In winter, in front of the building, you can see the famous ice skating rink, probably the most famous in the world. The famous picture, Lunch Atop a Skyscraper, was taken during the construction of this building. There is a very nice observation deck on top of the building, which is called Top of the Rock. Next building on the list, 40 Wall Street, is located in the financial district in Lower Manhattan, and it's right next to New York Stock Exchange. It was the tallest building in the world for 1 month until Chrysler Building was finished in May 1930. It's easily recognizable by the light blue spire, which is also lit by night. It was originally called Bank of Manhattan Trust Building, and currently is also called the Trump Building. 40 Wall Street was involved, together with Chrysler Building, in a very interesting race for the tallest building in the world. 40 Wall Street was projected to win, but we'll see what happened in a moment. Another interesting aspect of the race is the fact that the two architects involved, Craig Severance for 40 Wall Street and William Van Allen for Chrysler Building, used to be partners, and then they parted ways. So at this time, they were competitors. Next building is 70 Pine Street, also located in the financial district. It's only a few blocks from 40 Wall Street. It's not on either National Register of Historic Places or National Historical Landmark list, but it's a very beautiful skyscraper nevertheless. It was the last skyscraper to be built in Lower Manhattan prior to World War II. It became the tallest building in Lower Manhattan twice, once upon completion and the second time in 2001 when the Twin Towers were destroyed in the terrorist attack. This lasted until 2013 when they built Ford World Trade Center. The third sketch is One World Trade Center or Freedom Tower rebuilt in 2014, which is 1776 feet tall, the year of the Declaration of Independence. Chrysler Building, situated at the intersection of 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue, very close to Grand Central Terminal and another old skyscraper, Channon Building. It's considered by many to be the most beautiful old skyscraper in New York City, tallest building in the world until Empire State was built 11 months later. It is still the tallest steel-supported brick building in the world and the first building to be taller than the Eiffel Tower. There were no casualties recorded during the construction, which was unusual for that time. It's interesting to note that even today, skyscrapers cannot be built faster than 90 years ago, and one of the reasons is building and safety regulations, which are a lot stricter today than in the 1920s. Commissioned by Walter Chrysler in order to be the headquarters of Chrysler, it was nevertheless paid for with his own money so that his children could inherit it. Now, let's get to the interesting race for the tallest building. It's between Chrysler Building and Bank of Manhattan, as 40 Wall Street was called back then. The two teams were watching each other very closely. If one team added more floors, the other would follow suit. By the time it topped out, the Bank of Manhattan building was taller than Chrysler Building, which was almost complete, and they didn't expect Chrysler Building to be able to gain any additional height. But Van Allen, the architect of Chrysler Building, had a 185-foot spire built secretly inside the building. This secured Chrysler's first place, as it was too late for Bank of Manhattan to do anything about it. A victory that turned out to be, as we said, also short-lived, until Empire State was built 11 months later. The spire goes on top of the building on October 23, 1929, but America doesn't have time to celebrate. A day later, on October 24th, also called Black Thursday, stocks lose 11% of their value, while next week, on October 29th, on Black Tuesday, the stock market collapses, and this marks the beginning of the Great Depression, which will last for 10 years. As for the architect, Van Allen, Chrysler Building, his greatest accomplishment, also guaranteed his obscurity. It seems they failed to sign a contract and that Walter Chrysler refused to pay him. There was a lawsuit, and as a result of that, this made him an architect suing the company that hired him. He ended up not getting any contract anymore for any major project. Empire State Building, the last one on the list and the tallest building in that time frame, is located at the intersection of 34th Street and 5th Avenue. Tallest building in the world from April 1931 to 1970 until World Trade Center North Tower was built, is the longest holder of the world's tallest building title. First building to have more than 100 floors, 102 to be exact. It has its own zip code, just like the White House. Speaking of the White House, at the inauguration, President Hoover turned on the illumination by pressing a button at the White House. So that's what the tallest building's podium looks like in 1931. First, Empire State. Second, Chrysler Building. Third, 40 Wall Street. replaced by 70 Pine Street in 1932. Empire State has a little and not so famous brother, 500 Fifth Avenue. Built on the same year as Empire State, designed by the same architecture team on an equally prominent site, 8 blocks away from its older brother on 42nd Street. Adjacent to Bryant Park, one of the most beautiful sites in New York City. Unlike Empire State, it's asymmetrical, it's thinner, and it does not have a spire, but it can be mistaken for Empire State. There were many movies made about Empire State, probably the most famous one being King Kong in 1933. My favorite movie about it is An Affair to Remember, made in 1957, starring Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr. And if you're asking my kids, they really loved Elf. They even call Empire State the Elf Building. We're done with the tallest buildings, but I couldn't complete the list without mentioning 2 of my favorite buildings, even if they're not among the tallest, situated in 2 of my favorite New York City areas, Bryant Park Hotel and Flatiron Building. Bryant Park Hotel is adjacent to Bryant Park. It's right next to New York Public Library and 500 Fifth Avenue, Empire State's younger brother, which we mentioned earlier. It used to be called American Radiator Building, as it was built for this company, American Radiator. It has a unique black facade. Black brick symbolizes coal, related to radiators, while gold brick symbolizes fire. The architecture plan is based on Eliel Saarinen's unbuilt competition entry for the Tribune Tower in Chicago. Saarinen's design came in second, and some preferred his design. He's the father of Eero Saarinen, considered one of the masters of American 20th century architecture. He designed, among others, Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Washington Dulles Airport, and TWA Flight Center in New York City. Raymond Hood, the architect of Bryant Park Hotel, also designed 30 Rock, and he was one of the architects who designed Chicago Tribune Tower. Flatiron Building is located at the intersection of 2 of the most important streets in New York City, Fifth Avenue and Broadway. It's also very close to MetLife Tower, which we mentioned before, and Madison Square Park. Flatiron is probably the most instantly recognizable skyscraper in the world. Revolutionary at the time, it was one of the first skyscrapers to use a steel frame. It was made possible after New York City's building code removed the requirement that masonry be used for fireproofing considerations. That's what my wife's Flatiron looks like. The building was supposed to be called Fuller Building, but I guess it just looks too much like a Flatiron to be called something else. The building narrows to just 6 feet at its front corner. It's probably not so obvious, but the building has a right angle. It used to be the face of New York City until they built Empire State Building about 30 years later. Built by George Fuller, a very innovative architect turned builder and engineer who is credited as being the inventor of the modern skyscraper, and his son-in-law, Harry S. Black, who would be the CEO of Fuller Company after Fuller died in 1900. Fuller used new materials and methods, and he wasn't afraid to experiment, but he had to overcome resistance from the industry, which shied away from what it called untested ways of building. The architect of the building was Daniel Burnham. Both Burnham and Fuller designed and built many buildings in Chicago, which allowed steel frame a decade earlier than New York City. Here are some of the buildings Fuller built there. Opera House in 1885, Monadnock Building in 1889, Tacoma Building in 1889, Rand McNally Building in 1889, the first all-steel frame skyscraper, Rookery Building in 1891, to which a young Frank Lloyd Wright contributed too. We'll get back to Frank Lloyd Wright in a second, given his prominent place in American architecture. In any case, Fuller soon realized that New York City would grow because New York City had more money than Chicago. Let's get back to New York City and Flatiron. At that time, New York City building codes required building supporting walls so thick that they took up nearly half the ground floor space and much of the upper floors as well. That's why steel was a material of great interest to Fuller. Brooklyn Bridge, world's first steel wire suspension bridge, was completed in 1883. Also, Fuller capitalized on the invention of the safety elevator, created in 1853 and patented in 1861. The inventor was Elijah Otis. Frank Lloyd Wright, mentioned before related to Rookery Building in Chicago, lived between 1867 and 1959 and was recognized in 1991 by the American Institute of Architects as the greatest American architect of all time. Inspiring not just by his amazing works, but also by the fact that he was in his 90s when he was still working on the designs for Guggenheim, his most recognized masterpiece. He was 76 when he started and 92 when the museum was finished in 1959, also the year Wright died. The museum is located in Upper East Side in New York City, close to Central Park. He's my favorite architect too, but as you can see, there is a connection to New York City architecture. Fallingwater, in rural southwestern Pennsylvania, was designed in 1935 and was named by the same American Institute of Architects the best all-time work of American architecture. Wright was 68 in 1935. I know, we've been all over the place. Let's go quickly over those old New York City skyscrapers one more time. MetLife Tower, Woolworth Building, 30 Rock, 40 Wall Street, 70 Pine Street, Chrysler Building, Empire State, and then Bryant Park Hotel and Flatiron Building. Thanks for watching this video. Please let us know which is your favorite building, tall or not so tall.